Morning, everyone. Right, okay, so you've got, I guess, two techies really standing up here now. So we come from a technical background, as George alluded to, so not sales at all. I mean, I see George was asking there how many people are Hyper-V, how many VMware. It looks like a good 95% are VMware. Out of those running VMware, how many have got anything like site recovery, SRM running? Is there a fair few? Just a few of you there? How many people running a virtualized environment have full DR capabilities that they can fail it over to another site? Okay, reasonable amount, probably about 30-odd%. And how many of you that are running that think it's quite complex setup and quite expensive as well? Yes, there's a few of you who I think it's quite complicated, yeah. It tends to be what we find, a lot of people using VMware, a lot of people using SRM, and the technology involved in failing it over, setting it up from all the different types of replication can often be quite costly, quite complex to set up. And the funny bit is whenever there's a disaster and someone has to invoke it, they always try and work out how long the disaster is going to last before they think they have to fail it over because they'd rather not. That's what I tend to find, being honest with you. Okay, right, so let's see, move these slides on. So I want to talk about Azure Site Recovery, ASR. It's been around for a little while. It was updated quite recently, and we like the technology quite a lot. We think it's very simple to use. It works out of the box, not much configuration at all. Mitesh is actually going to show it you in a few minutes, a live demo of it running on VMware and failing it over to Azure. And you'll see it's quite simple. Some of the things that we like about it is once it's set up and running, it's quite easy to manage and maintain. I'll put up there recovery time. You can get it down to quite low. It depends on the size of the environment. So typically a small number of machines you could bring up in probably 15 minutes, half an hour. The rest you can bring up afterwards. We can orchestrate the way that the DR comes online, so critical service first and then other ones behind that. The data loss at the moment, the smallest replication window is for 15 minutes, so every 15 minutes you can update the data, and that can be stretched up to 4 hours. So some of your machines that are quite critical can be a very small window, and others can be slightly larger. The failing over can be orchestrated, so rather than you trying to work out in your current failing over, how do I do it, shall I do it? This is quite simple and straightforward. Actually does fail over in an organised manner, and you can sort of script that or orchestrate that, and Mitesh will show that as well. And the thing that we're finding, including ourselves, is that if you're running these replicated environments, the DR site is often quite expensive to run and maintain. And I'd say in a huge number of cases, the actual DR site actually isn't doing that much in most organisations that I go to. So they might have a complete copy of their live environment in a DR site, but it's actually sitting there doing not a lot other than consuming power, electricity and everything else. They're quite expensive to run. Some organisations will try and use test and dev on it, but not that many really. What this gives you the ability to is to replicate everything into Azure. There's a minimal charge for doing that. It's very small per VM, and it's very small for the amount of data. And it's only when you have your disaster that you need to invoke it that you actually start paying the full price of that environment. And you're only paying for it while you're using it. And then as soon as you've finished and you fail back and you shut it down again, it goes back to that minimal cost. As I touched on there, it's all can be orchestrated. We've put Hyper-V or VMware actually can do physical machines as well, so this isn't just a virtualization technology. There are, I think, James touched on earlier on, you see some of the dashboards that he was showing where you can actually monitor the health of the Azure environment, so you can make sure it is all running okay and not when it goes to fail over, is it okay, is it healthy, is it up to date, all of that you can monitor. Recovery plans, Mitesh will come on to, you can actually say what do I want to bring up in what order, so it's quite customizable. And there's other things on there, so actually a lot of organisations I go to very rarely test their DR, so that they know that it's all replicated, but they don't test it very often, maybe once a year, maybe never, maybe hope it works. This you can actually bring the entire replication DR up in an isolated environment, make sure the whole thing works. And test it that way while still running live. So it's very good for that. I think I've touched on the last bits there. It's very cost effective. I mean, I'm sure George will come on to later on about the savings that you can be made. And some of the things that we do, we can help set this up and give trials as well for that. From a graphical point of view, this is just a simple overview really of obviously you've got your virtual physical environment on site and it's just replicating up to Azure. I mean, I think I've covered most of that in what I've said. And some of the other features I've touched on there, obviously the low overhead in Azure is the fact that you're only paying a minimal charge for why it's being replicated, not why it's turned off. Mitesh will cover more about how it works with VMware, but it needs a device or a server to actually do the replication. It doesn't need much, so a single server will replicate about 50 virtual machines. It does Hyper-V as well as you would expect, so without any problems at all there. And for those of you worried about data and encryption, data is encrypted as it gets travelled across, and it's encrypted on the storage as well at the other end. And I've said that testing of the whole environment is available. Once it's running, you can have VPN access to that, remote desktop access to that. Actually, you can click on a small icon and download a VPN client for your Windows machine, click on it, and automatically it will connect you up, log you on, and your environment's ready to go. Oh, sorry, it's okay, right. Some of the considerations for ASR is, although George asked if you're running NSX back there, I think most of you said that you're not. At the moment, if you're running a network on-premise, that network, you can't stretch it, so you can't stretch a VLAN from your on-premise and bring the same VLAN up in Azure at the moment. That may change, but there are ways of orchestrating when this machines come up that you can re-IP them and all those bits and pieces so that they still come up and work well. The actual server that does the replication needs a kind of scratch area or some storage space to do all of its working and send the data up. So there's a little bit of storage there. I think 600 gigs nowadays is not an awful lot, to be honest with you. And at the moment there are some limitations. Currently a 1 terabyte disk is the maximum size at the moment. I'm sure that will change soon. And there's only 16 disks per physical or virtual machine, but I don't know how many people have more than that nowadays, really. VMware, 5.5 or 6. Anyone running anything older than that nowadays? I think most people are on 5.5. And Hyper-V, those of you running Hyper-V, 2012 R2 is supported now. Okay, is it coming onto your... Oh, no. Quick start. Come back. I'll let you do your demo because I appreciate we've only got 20 minutes and you probably want a good 10, 15 minutes or 10 minutes.
So what we're going to show you is, as Mark went through some of those slides, is the actual live demo of the Azure recovery services. So as you can see, you need an Azure subscription to the recovery service portal to get started with. Additionally, you need some storage as well that you subscribe to through Azure, and you also need to create a virtual network within Azure. The virtual network that you create within Azure is your DR network, so it's when you fail over your virtual machines from on-prem, they have a network that they can map to and live on. As we mentioned, these steps when you map to networks, and I'll show you, can be pre-created prior to invoking any DR. They can be done during the DR as well, so there's scripts that can be run through the recovery plan and manual steps as well to ensure that when stuff does come up on the Azure site, it's with the correct IP address and it's also started in the correct order as well. So just to give you a quick overview of what you get. So as with most sort of DR thing, you can create protection groups. So protection groups will group your VMs together, so whichever policies you apply to those ones in terms of the RPOs, RTOs, any recovery plans, they're all grouped in within the VMs that you're replicating. You can also, you don't have to create protection groups, you can just replicate single VMs as well. So I will quickly show you an example. So Some of the stuff that Mark touched on here is the kind of configurations you can do. So there's a source server, so there's an on-site server in your VM environment that acts as a process and transfer server. So that's the one which has the 600 gig disk that it requires for the kind of scratch space to hold the IOs that it intercepts, and then sends them to the Azure platform as a service to hold them until you then decide to do a DR, which is where it's changed a lot, and that's the kind of key bit where it's not doing any conversion of your VM machine into a Hyper-V machine. It's actually just storing the IOs and then putting them into a machine in Azure that you then spin up. So it's not an actual conversion from VMware to Hyper-V that allows this process. So whatever machines that you have on-prem, they will behave the same as when they are brought up in the Azure Site Recovery. So that VM, I'll just quickly flick across to it. That VM is literally just got, it just needs a VMware PowerShell CLI added onto it. It needs a vault encryption key, because this is the bit where we said the data is kept encrypted in flight and in session. So there's a vault encryption key that's created when you sign up to the recovery service. That's just downloaded and installed on this machine as well. And then Microsoft provides you with a unified server installation. The unified server installation is an installation package that you download again from, I'll just quickly flip back, from your recovery, when you can just download it from the dashboard. And so go back one more. It's got the options to download depending on what you're protecting over here, and it's a unified sort of application that you download, install it onto your on-prem server, and once it's installed on your on-prem server, it will just ask you for some authentication on how to connect to your vCenter, and then that's how it then marries the two up and be able to search for VMs within the vCenter when you want to add them into protection groups. So just to flip back. So also what it does create at the same time as when you create the protection groups is what we touched on as well. It creates your failed back group as well. So this is when you have failed over a machine into the Azure site recovery and it's running in Azure. It also now creates a failed back group on its own so that it will replicate any changes back to your on-prem if it's still available. So if you are just doing a protection group that fails over Exchange, and then it will create your failed back to your environment as long as it can see a vCenter straight away, and then when the machines are up, it will start replicating back again. If you have a complete site failover, it still creates a failback group, and then it will, as long as you give it the similar IP addresses or the same IP address, I should say, then it will also connect back and do it. So that's where some of the automation bit comes in, and it's all kind of set up for you. So going into this, so just some of the individual properties. As you can see, it gives you quite a few, just clicking through it, it will give you a lot of information about what's been replicated, when it's been replicated, where it's come from. These process servers is the one that I showed you on the on-premises one. Generally, a single process server will do about 50 average size VMs. You can add more process servers on-prem if you want to carry on doing faster or quicker RPOs and RTO replications as well. So just quickly shoot some. So these are all set on, as I say, you can set these settings on an individual level, or you can set them at the protection group, and they give you the options of what kind of size you want when it spins up into Azure. By default, it will look at what you've got on-prem for that particular machine and try and match it to an A1, A2, or an Azure type machine. So you can come in and sort of reconfigure it if you know that that's not what the amount of resource you need it to run. It also then lets you map your networking as well. So as I say, this can also be done through an automation runbook, or you can have it pre-configured every time you get a VM replicated across. So it needs a DR network, the subnet is on, and the IP address. And when the machine comes up into Azure Site Recovery, it will come up with those settings. So to add machines, you can, as we mentioned before, you can add virtual machines or physical machines. If we add virtual machines, it's going to look into our, and as I say, when we run demos, Mark knows we kind of use all our live infrastructure. So this will pull out all the stuff that's in your current vCenter. The machine has to be powered on for it to be selected. So anything that's orange is because it's powered off currently. So these are all our kind of machines. It's literally just selecting the machines that you want to copy across, and then, as I say, you can set the information per protection group, or you can set it on an individual VM basis. Once the machine's replicated across, you get kind of the information about the last update time when it was replicated across, and you've got a couple of options at the bottom here. So you've got an option to do a test failover, which is what we were discussing earlier on. So this will tick the boxes on any DR plans that you want to do. You can test failover a whole protection group, which includes all the DR plans and the run books, or you can just bring it up in a selected, isolated network that you want to just make sure that it powers up and all the applications run correctly and so forth. The other option you've got is obviously the live failover of the virtual machine, and when it comes up, it'll obviously say that it's from on-premises, so our VMware environment, and it's going to spin it up into the Azure subscription. You've got the options of the last successful recovery point, or you can pick something obviously beforehand in case there was a corruption that you're aware of. And you can also tick the box so that it shut down the machine that's running on-prem as well, if you know you're going to do it. So what I'm going to do is we're just going to kick this off. It takes probably about 15 to 20 minutes for it to spin up into Azure. We can revisit it probably after the next one. So I'll just kick that off. So that will also go back into, and we'll show you this as well. So it will go back into the VM environment and also shut down the machine that's running in our vCenter as well. So it will just, we'll have a look. But once it's passed the validation parts of it, it will come and send a signal to VMware on-prem as well to shut that machine down and bring it up into Azure. And what we'll see afterwards as well, when it's running through these, it will also, when the machine comes in Azure, by default, will give you RDP connection to it. If you've configured, and we can show you this outside, I think, on more on the hands-on labs, if you've configured express route, or if you've configured VPNs or site-to-site VPNs, all the connectivity can be preloaded into there. Additionally, you can have endpoint connectors that are preloaded onto end users' laptops that connect to an RDS if one of these machines was the RDS, and they'll be instantly connected to that as well. It works very similar on Windows 10 as direct access, so it comes up as a connection point, and when it knows you've invoked DR, it will connect to that and then seamlessly sort of carry on working with the machines when they're brought up. What I'm going to quickly touch on is the recovery plans. So that one we've just manually done a failover. What you can also do is, as we mentioned in the thing, this is where the orchestration bit comes in. What you can create is recovery plans. With the recovery plans, you can put your whole protection group in there and say, I want this whole protection group to be part of it, or you can select individual machines. I'll just click the RDS box. And once it will create the protection group, we can go in there and edit this recovery plan in terms of how we want that recovery plan to behave. So, just let that finish off. While it's creating that, I'll just quickly, just to touch on the servers that you need. So it looks at your vCenter, these process servers. When you're doing a failover, it uses, so at the moment the failover that it's doing is using my on-prem process server to fail that machine over. So obviously there's a lot of data transfer going back and forth. What you can also do is during your failover process, if it's a large number of VMs that you're failing over, you can actually create a process server on the fly that sits in Azure, and it only consumes the resources while you're doing your failover. So this is where we're saying it's a lot more cost-effective situation. It's literally just the click here to add the process server, give it an IP address on the DR LAN, and then it will go and bring all the configuration that it needs on its own, and then it will start doing the processing on both sides. So in effect, you half-ish your recovery time back into Azure. I'll quickly go back to recovery plan that should be created. So within the recovery plan, it's, as you said, some of you put your hands up for SRM. It's similar. It's in terms of what you can create, the groups you can create, the steps you can create. So you can say fail over a virtual machine first, check to make sure that the sequels come up before you then start up my web machine and so forth. You can add some scripts as well. Before or after the recovery. You do need to have an automation account created within Azure. There's no cost to it. It's just a place where you can, and again I can show you outside, where there's loads of scripts that are already predefined. Lots of people have wrote them out, tested them, tried them. It just requires a little bit of modification on your side to literally bring up a whole high available SharePoint site. So that's all available, and then you can create the different types of runbooks that you've got. So we've got a handful for ourselves here, but these runbooks you can write them in PowerShell. You can use, as I say, lots of ones you can download from GitHub, and you know there's a whole load you can write, and I say you can write your own PowerShell bits in there as well. So just seeing what else I could quickly cover. It gives you a full kind of progress on what's going on. So this is the actual failover that it's doing. So it's passed all the prerequisites, shutting down the virtual machine, doing any last changes, and now it's trying to bring up the machine into Azure. So you can see here it's powered off the virtual machine TIG recovery on my on-prem, because we picked the option to power that down. This will probably take in the average of about 15 minutes, so we can come back to that one. Just see if there is. As I say, it's all monitored as well, so you get a lot of the monitoring is available wherever you kind of click through. So it's not just in sort of one process. So if you have a look here, it's saying that I've got a critical process server. So this process server was brought up a while back, as I mentioned, as one of those examples to help with the failback. Obviously, it's been shut down now, and you have also when you bring up a process server on the fly, you can tick a box to say shut this one down once it's done, because obviously we don't want it to consume additional resources while it's there. So we'll come back in a bit, and that machine should hopefully be running in Azure. Then what we're going to also show outside, because of time constraints, but feel free to come and have a look at it during the lunch break, is the fail back into VMware as well. So that's one of the reasons why we shut that machine off, because what we're also going to do is take that machine that's sitting in Azure and then fail it back into our VMware environment. And it's, again, a process that's all driven from this Azure console. And as I say, all you need is your vCenter up and running back in that place, or if it was a full site failover, then you'd have to rebuild the vCenter, but it can still point back to that one. So I'll run that once that one's done.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So we'll come back to that after to talk about the Azure stack. Now we'll come back to that one while that's replicating. But is that of interest to anybody? Does that look much slicker than what you're expecting? Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it? Yeah. So we'll cover the Azure stack now.
Just need the presentation back again. Is it that one?
Is it that one? Yeah. And then we'll come back to that. And as Mitesh said, we're around at lunchtime and just after, and we're happy to go into that in more detail. And we'll also show those that you're interested, actually you can fail it back, and it fails back just as easy as it failed over. Just so that those that you doubt whether it works, we can show that.
Right, let me just find where we need to be at before I do it.
Just go back one Mitesh.
Sorry.
Did you want to cover that one quickly, George?
Yeah, just quick. So, James, when's Azure going to have a PA system?
When's Azure going to have a PA system?
I was more worried about the demo not working, but the PA system's gone, so sorry at the back. Can you hear at the back? Did you miss any of that? Just a bit. Yeah, unfortunately, the PA system has failed us, but Azure didn't. So that's a first, right, James?
The cloud wins.
So you're witnessing history. Anyway, thank you very much, Mitesh. That was an excellent presentation. So really, what I want to show you is, how much money you're wasting. I mean, could anyone put? Well, 85,000 is just a drop in the ocean. Anyone put 85,000 better use? Gives you the opportunity to spend more money with us, get further ahead, I guess. So what I've done is just taken a very simple example. I know some of you have got much larger environments, but I'm just trying to be realistic in what we show you from a cost perspective. So 30 terabyte storage, 150 CPU, 400 gig around based on 50 virtual machines. Sorry, can we maybe? It's only a presentation. The PA man. So what I thought I'd start with is just talk you through what that would cost you and what are the line items in putting that solution into ASR. So monthly replication, really, because you're only paying for storage, there is a cost for every instance that you run, and you can have it in two configurations. You can have Azure to on-premise or Azure to Azure, because as you're all charging ahead, putting production environments into Azure, you may want to use ASR to provide DR for that component, although Azure's never going to go down. So the monthly cost of the on-prem to Azure is £2,312. So that's for that environment there. So obviously the larger environments, it's the storage cost that increases. Now, the biggest chunk of that £2,000 odd is the cost per instance. So it's £9.90 something per instance, so per VM. So you can see there very quickly that, you know, £1,500 of £500 of that is just for running the VMs in that replicated state, and the rest of it is just storage. So as your environments get bigger, you just pay a little bit more for storage. So 1 month's invocation for that type of workload, depending on, and what I did was a mix of A1, A3, just to show that there's a mix of type of service you're recovering, is nearly £8,000. So combined, 35,000. And that's assuming that you use ASR for the year and you have 1 month's worth of failover. I mean, it's got to be a pretty horrific disaster for you to be in failover mode for 1 month. So really, you just divide that by 31 days to give you the £8,000 to give you the actual real cost. So we've got calculators that do this for you. So we can do an analysis on your environment and then calculate for you what your ASR costs based on 5 days recovery, 10 days recovery, and so on. And there's obviously some network components, and this doesn't take into account express route. You may not need express route for this type of environment because where you connect is via RDS or VPN. Okay. Right. So what would it cost you traditionally? So is there any accountants in the room? I know there's accountancy firms, but so if you've got your accountant to dig out all the real cost, not the cost that you think exists. So that's the cost of co-locating racks. So in this scenario, there's 2 racks because there's a good mix of techies. So I'll shout out what I think you'd need in your DR location, and if I miss anything, shout it out. So you need hosts. So you probably need 6 hosts for this type of environment. You need storage. You need core switch for your networking, for your storage as well. You need some additional switches for your external links. Probably because you're sitting inside a data center, you'll then need some cross connects to your data provider, your MPLS provider, because you've got to get to it. Otherwise, you've got a great DR solution, but you just can't get to it. Then you need your co-location partner to provide you an internet breakout, because it's not much use to you unless you can get out of the data center. And then you can need some firewalling. And then you need to make that resilient, because no point having a DR environment that's not resilient, because if you have a double disaster, you're left high and dry. So did I miss anything? No? Okay. So as you can see there, what we try to estimate is this is the recurring charges. So nearly £60,000 of recurring charges a year, which is already more than the exceptionally cheap and really good value ASR service. A little woohoo over there from James, no? And
Busy tweeting.
it's obvious, right? And then if you look at your depreciation costs, so and 62,000, and I've taken that over 4 years, not 3 years. Some of you may turn around and say, well, when's the last time you bought IT equipment? And it should be a lot higher than that. But what we're trying to do is trying to be realistic. So what you might end up doing is you might cascade production environments down into your DR location. So that's the residual cost that's left behind for some of these environments. But you've also got to maintain it, because you're not going to have a DR environment that you don't maintain. So that's the cost there. So a massive £85,000 saving for this client. Hands up, who wants some savings? Shall we come and talk to you in the break? So, we're back to the Mark and Mitesh double act. Who's up first?
Thanks, George. I'm guessing we're a bit behind now with some of the issues and the talking. Okay, so we'll cover the Azure stack. I'll just do a couple of minutes. I'll hand over straight to Mitesh so he can actually show you in the real world. I think that's more interesting than listening to me talk for too long. So the Azure stack, you've seen some of the Azure on the screen there. You've seen some of the interface, how it looks, how you access it, the dashboards, all the rest of it. In a nutshell, wouldn't that be really nice if you could run that on-premise as well? So that actually what you can see in Azure is what you can actually see on-prem as well. So the Azure stack is kind of that on-premise, which is coming out later this year. So it's on Server 2016, and there's an option on there which will come with the Azure stack. Is it going? Yeah, so as we put there, it gives you the ability to take what's in Azure to your data center. You can deliver exactly the same as in Azure, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service experience, and it gives you the same look and feel. So you can spin things up in Azure and see how it works and runs, but equally you could actually, when this comes out, you can build your own Azure environment on-prem, test everything and make sure you're happy with it at no cost because it's your equipment, and then you can then transfer it up into Azure knowing full well that it will work straight away. I'll skip the graphic and save a bit of time, and then this is a couple of slides just showing you the look and feel is exactly the same, but Mitesh will come on and show you the real version of it. We've actually got the preview of Server 2016 and the Azure stack running, so I'd rather show you the real thing so it's not smoke and mirrors. But you can see there that the look and feel in the cloud against on-prem looks remarkably similar. When you're running PowerShell commands, the PowerShell commands that you run in Azure are exactly the same ones as you're running on-premise, so exactly the same. You know it's going to work. And this is building your SQL server, so it's going to ask you a number of questions of what type of environment you want. You can see very clearly that it's the same look and feel in Azure and on-premise as well. It just makes it nice and easy. So shall I get you to
Try and connect again.
This is where the screen goes blank, is it?
Hopefully not this time around.
You good?
Yep. Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. Right. So what we're going to go through here is the Azure stack, and as we saw from some of those screenshots, a lot of the configuration and the way Azure stack works is very similar to Azure cloud services. So what we mean by that is that what we're trying to achieve here is that you can run Azure stack on-prem, and you can use your own resources to sort of size up what you would eventually need when you move over to Azure public cloud. You can make sure whatever you're trying to test and develop works, and obviously consuming just your own resources. But the advantage here is that whatever you're doing on-prem, you don't need to convert it, you don't need to rerun it or rewrite scripts. The same deployment plan, whether you use PowerShell or Visual Studio, whatever you're using to develop your application or your application stack can literally just be redeployed into the public cloud. The Azure stack at the moment gives you the same sort of storage differentiators, so it gives you the blobs, it gives you the tables, the queues, it gives you the same type of sizing material. So my Azure stack on-prem can run an A1 machine, an A2 machine, a B1 machine, so it's very, very like for like. And as we've seen with some of the portals, This is Azure Stack, so this is on-prem, but as you can see, the look and feel is very similar to what you see in the Azure portal as well. So they've tried to keep it as very similar as possible in terms of developing, in terms of resource groups, naming, and how it's all sort of conducted. This has all come about from, and again, we can talk a little bit more outside about this, but in the way that the Azure Resource Manager, or what was known as ARM templates, have been developed. So these develop your whole application as a whole. So you'll see it will create your storage for you, your virtual machines for you, your databases for you, your public IP addresses, your networks. Everything is done within one deployment plan. And once it's done, it's built as that resource, and that's what's portable from on-prem into Azure and back again. So just to show you one of these PowerShell scripts. So as you can see, there's some bits here which pull graphics from the actual one. You do need, you do need a tenant, an Azure tenant, so a subscription to Azure, because it does pull off the information from there, and the logins and the single sign-on all run through there. It pulls off some graphics, but you can see there's certain the resource manager endpoint is local to the deployment, and you will also see that the providers are slightly modified in order to run local storage rather than obviously consuming on there. This is a typical sort of deployment template to demonstrate an IaaS service in Azure. This, as I say, this bit of the template can be run exactly the same on premises, or I can change the parameters up here to run it in Azure Public Cloud. It literally builds a virtual machine, takes some information from a JSON template where it's got all the networking information, the naming conventions and so forth. So I'm just going to quickly get that off. When you start that off, as I say, you do need a subscription to the tenant. So what it will first do is it will ask you for authentication into your live Azure subscription. So I'll just quickly do that. And once it's authenticated, it will then start building the virtual machine on your on-prem Azure stack. Oh, always happens. Right, third time lucky. Right. So that's gone in and that's authenticated, and as you can see, while that was happening in the background, it's brought up some of the information about my online one and how it's mapping across, but it's the same way as if this was getting built on the Azure Public Cloud. You would see the same information, except it's all just running it locally here, and this will take about, so just, you know, this is building the whole resource arm, the ARM template, as they say. So it's building a security group for me, it's building my storage, it's building a VM, it's building my remote access to that machine, it's building some other stuff as well that we've sort of bundled into the JSON template. So it's one sort of PowerShell command, it's building the whole app, and then that can also, once I've worked out the sizing and I know that it works well in the Azure Stack, I can then sort of move that into the Azure Public Cloud. And it also helps, and we could, as we mentioned earlier on, with sort of running tests and dev on-prem first and then sort of scaling out onto the Azure Stack as you move along. So again, I'll flip back to that while I show you some of the other features of the Azure. So that's your kind of IaaS example of running Azure Stack. Microsoft, for this technical preview, has also released running SQL service and web services as a platform, as a service on-prem as well. So this is the sort of consumption side of running SQL databases without having to obviously build a whole SQL farm. You can literally go into, I'll just quickly show you. So there's some that are pre-created, so I can quickly walk one through. So the same way, and if time permitting, I'll quickly flip back to the actual Azure portal live one and show you how it's exactly the same menu bars, the same sort of options that you sort of create. So this allows me to create a SQL server. I'll just make sure I don't name it the same as something else. So I give it a database name, the correlation, I pick a subscription. So if this was getting consumed on the Azure tenant on the public cloud, you'll pick your pay-as-you-go or whichever subscriptions you got. There's a default subscription that's linked to my tenant online, so I'll pick that. I'll create a resource group. So again, if this is where we're saying, so this is where it will put everything together. So if I want to just lift and move this SQL farm into the public cloud because I've tested it, it runs all my it runs on the right type of storage and it runs all my transactions, then I can just use this storage group. It asks me a few bits on whether I want to use any of my existing servers or do I want to create a brand new server. Quickly just pump in some stuff. To host this one, SQL details. I've already got that one. Keep it simple this time. And then it'll ask me where I want to host it. So our Azure stack is obviously local and it's in our running at our head office at the moment. So it will just prompt you for the location. You've got the pin to dashboard, which is coming up everywhere. So that will give you a quick find of your machine. And once you click OK, it will. Oh, sorry, one more option you need to pick. So this is, and these are based on how much of it you configure in order to align with the Azure cloud. So these are the same SKUs that you see in the Azure cloud when you go to pick SQL Server. So I can have 2012 SQL Server Edition, depending on what you put on your own prem templates and so forth. You can also put 2014 and so forth, and then the types of configurations that they've got that are available. So create a basic one. But this is where we're kind of saying that it will give you exactly the same as what you get on a public cloud, but here you can try it out, make sure that that B1 machine is the right one. And once you click create, it will start the deployment and you'll start getting some stats coming up to say how much you're consuming, what it's consuming, and how long it's going to sort of take for. So again, it's got all the management features that you get in the public cloud as well as on Stack. Just to show you some stuff so we know it's all kind of running, what it's going to be doing, and I'll show you, come back to this. These are just a quick overview. I mean, we don't have. I mean, these are the Hyper-V machines that run the Azure Stack currently. In this technical preview, just to point out, it's a one-server technical preview, so all the machines are virtual machines created on the 2016 Hyper-V platform. There is, as it develops through the technical previews, there will be options to sort of split these roles out. These are the types of machines, just at a very high level. This one controls your storage. This one controls Active Directory. Got some routing. The client VM is where I was deploying some of the stuff from. These ones with these are the SQL consumption servers that have been spun up. These are some of the load balancing, the NAT features, the network features. Customize the portal even further. SQL to run the back end of the Azure. I'll create the temp service, we'll ignore that, and some of your resource groups as well, which contain it all. So just to sort of flip back, am I doing for time?
Just wrap it up.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I mean, we can just quickly see some of those resource, if the machine's been created or if it's creating it. So there's the machine that we deployed from the template, and as you can see, it succeeded. That's the resource, sorry, this was a consumption SQL database, so it's all up and running. I'll see if it's created that's the one that we deployed. It's still deploying out, but as you can see, this is where the resourcing, as we're saying, it's still building out, but just to give you an example, it's got the virtual machine, it's got my NIC, it's got my security group, it's got my public IP address, so I can connect straight to the virtual machine. And again, I'll show you some more of this further out there. This will bring up the different types of storages as well. So again, you can sort of mimic the blobs, the tables, the queues. As you can see here, I've got a blob service, a table service, a queue, a file, exactly the same as what you see in Azure up there. Just to flip back. And as I say, one quick last just to finish it off. So that once that finishes building, I mean, more than happy to go through it with you sort of outside. And within here, it will build that SQL server that we saw for consumption. I can see it being created in here as a database, just to show you there's no sort of smoke and mirrors. There's the database created within the consumption model. So that consumption model, as you saw, was about a couple of minutes to create that whole SQL server and get people up and running. You can create it through loads of PowerShells, and I can show you some stuff outside in terms of bringing up a whole high available infrastructure within minutes to be able to do dev and test.
Yeah.
have to wrap it up. Okay, there's lots more, but yeah,
We're
feel
around-
free
we're
to
around
sort
over
of,
lunch and
yeah.
afterwards we can do some more in-depth stuff on this, but this is really in 15, 20 minutes to try and give you a flavour of what's coming. And hopefully that sort of whetted your appetite, and actually you can see why even the hardcore VMware guys are being converted.